So, firstly, my name is Richard Manton. I'm the Deputy Registrar at Engineers Ireland. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's event. This is to launch our new set of accreditation criteria labelled as January 2021. So over the next hour, we'll have some speakers really to launch the accreditation criteria, to tease out some of the detail, and then to speak a bit about our accreditation function. So I'm very glad that we're joined today by the President of Engineers Ireland, Maurice Buckley, who will say a few words. Then Damien Owens, our Registrar, and I will give a presentation on the new criteria. And then we're also joined by Maria Kine, the Head of Faculty at Limerick Institute of Technology, who's also a member of our accreditation board, to say a few words about her perspective on the criteria. We'll have a Q&A then at the end of the webinar, so there'll be an opportunity to ask any questions. But in the meantime, please feel free to use the chat function to any comments you have or any questions that you have for the panel. So with that, I'll hand over to the President of Engineers Ireland, Maurice Buckley, to officially launch our new accreditation criteria. So thank you, Maurice.
Thank you, Richard, and good afternoon, everybody. As Richard said, my name is Maurice Buckley, current President of Engineers Ireland. The day job is I'm head of the Office of Public Works, the OPW, and I'm an electrical engineer of long standing, but please don't ask me about Ohm's law or anything like that today. Delighted to be here and to represent the organisation and the officers of the organisation and the council of the organisation at what is for Engineers Ireland a very important event of publishing the updated accreditation criteria. The links we have in the organisation to academia and to colleges and to engineering courses is very important to us, and we're very proud of those links. We see it as a partnership. I suppose auditors come, yesterday I was dealing with financial auditors, and they came in and they told me, we are your partners, we're here to help you. And I said, yes, and hurry up and get out, because an auditor is an auditor. So I hope from the point of view of the colleges and the course providers, you do see the accreditation process as a partnership where we try to bring the current thinking from industry and indeed the international thinking and in a way to that all of the courses in Ireland can uniformly move along together, and we adjust and rebalance and hopefully continually improve standards and make engineering very relevant to society. So I can't claim any great knowledge of the academic area apart from my own experience as a student, but we have that strong link, as I say, and next year my successor as President of Engineers Ireland will be Professor Orla Feely from UCD, the Vice Chancellor of UCD and Head of Research there. So while she will obviously, and she's very strong about keeping her role totally separate from the accreditation role or any involvement in that, she will be able to bring very much the concerns of academia and the educational process very much to the fore in our council discussions and across the organisation. And I think that's very important and very timely in this difficult time that we're going through with COVID-19. I do feel very sorry for anybody involved in education at any level, from childcare all the way up to third level. 2020 was really challenging, and 2021 doesn't look like it's going to be any easier. But you're doing it very well, and if we in Engineers Ireland can help, we want to help. So as I say, the role is important to us, and particularly because it is a legislative role. Back in the Institution of Civil Engineers of Ireland Act 1969, we have that role and responsibility to establish and maintain proper standards of professional and general education and training for admissions to the different categories of membership. So we're very proud of that, and of course we've built up the international linkage over the years through the Washington Accord and a whole range of other agreements. And Damien in particular is very involved in the international engineering community. And I think that's very good for Irish engineers and engineering in Ireland, because we have our own graduates through the Irish educational system, and now we have quite a number, very high percentage of global engineers, people who are qualified elsewhere, coming to live in Ireland as Irish engineers move around the globe themselves and their careers. Just last week, we had an Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, in Engineers Ireland, or at least virtually in Engineers Ireland, to launch our strategy, our 3-year strategy in 2021 to 23. And again, there, the link to education and the link to accreditation is part of that strategy. But I was struck by how An Taoiseach responded to that element, and you could see immediately he was very interested in that, I suppose, as a former Minister for Education, and also a person responsible for leading Ireland forward, National Development Plan, all sorts of initiatives that involve advancing the technological standards in the country, supporting employment, supporting foreign investment, supporting Irish R&D and innovation, but also supporting infrastructure and the changes that are happening in Irish society, particularly maybe in the areas of sustainability, the areas of improving our management skills. And these are two areas that are reflected, I think, in the revised criteria that we're formally launching today. The profession is changing and developing very rapidly, and I must say that is something that strikes me this year as President of Engineers Ireland. Of course, we have 25,000 members, from students all the way up to fellows or retired members, and you do see different strata within that, people with different perspectives on the profession, and maybe with a different view if they qualified in the 70s or 80s compared to those who've qualified in the 90s or the noughties. And you see now, both with graduates and with employers, a much broader perspective on engineering. The technical skills are, of course, very important, but technology is changing so quickly that an engineer needs to be able to move and develop and stay on top of their profession, which we try and support in Engineers Ireland, but also needs to be equipped to go beyond pure engineering or core engineering. Personally, I believe engineers are very strong in management roles, and in lots of different societal roles, and it's something I'm delighted to see reflected in the evolution of the accreditation criteria. So delighted to be here to launch the criteria. I just want to tell you that the formal process, the work was done by the Accreditation Board, who I might mention in a moment, but the formal process within Engineers Ireland is that work and these criteria came to the Executive Board of Engineers Ireland, which I chair as president, for formal approval. And we have a lot of items to approve at the Executive Board from time to time, and we do approve a number of times a year the different courses that are accredited and re-accredited, and there's always an interest in that. But I was struck, and it's a compliment, I think, to everybody involved, the level of interest and the level of appreciation at that meeting for these new accreditation criteria. There were what, maybe 20 people in the room. 3 or 4 of them would have had an academic background and be maybe aware of the content in detail. Most of us, though, from industry or from big organizations, were just impressed with the scale and the scope of engineering courses now, and the topics and themes that are covered in the accreditation criteria. And you know, it is to your credit as academic institutions and as academics that it is you who have developed this material and these courses over the years, and we're delighted in Engineers Ireland to work with you. But I think the end product is a real credit to everybody involved, and that was reflected at that meeting. I just wanted to give you that back. We were all struck by it. I think it's the first time that we ended up having a very long and effusively positive discussion around academic accreditation criteria. So that was good to see. So I won't take any more of your time because I think it's important that Damien and Richard go through the criteria with you, and they'll give a flavour, I think, of those aspects which struck us at that executive board meeting. But I do want to thank the accreditation board and the voluntary work that's done, and I hope everybody appreciates that Engineers Ireland, it's a small organization, small number of staff supporting 25,000 members with a huge amount of activities, and this is one of the big ones, but we couldn't do it without a huge volunteer contribution from people who have the expertise and experience and the willingness to give quite a lot of their time. So I do want to thank the Accreditation Board, chaired by Professor Cyril Berkeley, and the Accreditation Review Group, John Carley, Professor Michael Conlon, Professor Edward Jones, Maria Kine, who you're going to hear from a little bit later, Gerard McMichael, Dr. Noel Murphy, and Peter Roach. So on behalf of all of Engineers Ireland, I'd like to thank them, and I'd like to also thank those from academia and from the academic institutions who participated in the workshops to develop these criteria, responded to surveys, and all the different online briefing sessions. So I'm going to hand back to you, Richard, or to Damien, to go through the detail. But once again, I'm delighted to be here to formally launch the criteria, and thank you everybody for coming along this afternoon.
Good. Thanks, Morris. And I'll just now ask Damien to take over. And just to remind people that today's proceedings will be recorded, will be available on our website in the next day or so. Okay, over to you, Damien.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Morris, for that introduction. It's good to see many familiar faces attending today from, I suppose, all over the country and north of the border as well. So you're very welcome to this presentation. So I'm going to give, I suppose, a brief context of where we've come from and why we undertake accreditation, and then Richard will take you through the changes that we've put into the new criteria. So why do we undertake accreditation? Well, it's really, I suppose, to ensure that our engineering education is meeting international standards and best practice. But also, there's a very, I suppose, relevant point to it. It's to our criteria are aligned with our various professional titles for chartered engineer, associate engineer, engineering technician, and they're globally recognized. So we have recognition agreements and mobility agreements through various accords, and it facilitates the mobility of engineers to other countries. So for example, an Irish engineer going to Australia, their qualification, if it's accredited, will be recognized, and they're exempted from many of the entry criteria and language tests, for example. So there is actually, it smoothens the path, but also reduces the cost considerably. And equally, coming into Ireland, the Department of Innovation and Jobs has highlighted our professional titles as criteria and eligibility for people on the highly specialized skills list. So there is a real world relevance to it. Our engineering accreditation, we cover programs from level 6 to 9 on the National Framework of Qualifications at every university and institute of technology in Ireland. The key point is that in their assessment of programs, we're looking at an outcomes-based process, and Ireland has been one of the leaders in the outcomes-based arena. Nearly all of our universities and institute of technology are now on the third or fourth cycle of outcomes-based assessment, so it's very advanced. We undertake a review every 5 years and review the programs at each university and IoTs. It's, as we said, it's outcomes based. So we're looking at evidence. We interview students, we interview employers, we interview graduates to make sure that what they have learned is relevant, that is hitting the mark when they go into industry and reflects industry needs. So all of this is overseen by the Accreditation Board in Engineers Ireland, which in turn, as Morris has said, reports to the Executive Board. Our first accreditation was in 1982, and we currently have over 223 accredited programs and a number of historical programs as well. So we look at the database of programs, and these are available on our website. Richard, if you can change slide there. Yeah, so this gives an indication of the number of programs. So there is a perception that that the vast bulk of engineering programs in Ireland are civil and building. As you can see from the graph there, they account for actually quite a minority of it. Electronic would probably be the largest contributor to the accreditation, the bulk of accredited courses to date. And if we go towards the bottom of that bar chart, we'll see that level 9 programs are becoming quite prominent, and they're gradually increasing. The level 6 component is gradually decreasing, not the demand there is falling, and the level 8 are, I suppose, coalescing into one. But the level 9 programs is actually growing at this time. In the global context, there are two main sets of agreements. There's the International Engineering Alliance, which looks after the Washington Accord, the Sydney Accord, and the Dublin Accord, and they specifically look at different levels of engineering education, and they're represented there in the light blue colours. The second main body for accreditation is INAE, European Network for Accreditation of Engineering Education. And though the outcomes are largely the same, they're more formalized around the Bologna process, so the first cycle and second degree cycle framework. And Ireland, the UK, Russia, and Turkey are, I suppose, the few jurisdictions that are actually a member of both sets of accreditation organizations. And at the moment, I have the honor to lead both of those organizations. So I think Ireland has been a leader in this field for a number of years, and probably because of our unique perspective of look and global perspective and the mobility of our engineers, it's important that we retain that. So both of these organizations produce sets of international guidelines, and they're freely available on their respective websites. So on the International Engineering Alliance, they produce a set of graduate attributes and professional competencies. So they go beyond just the pure learning outcomes that will be taught in university, and build on that with practical competencies that are required on the job. So they go all the way up to professional development. On the EURACE, there's a framework, standards and guidelines for engineering education. And as I said, they're based around the Bologna and the process, so they're stratified in first and second cycle degrees. So they largely look at the same learning outcomes in the academic environment. And then there are further guidelines from both organizations on the best practice, how to undertake reviews of and accreditation of engineering programs. Translating that then into Engineers Ireland language, we have our own accreditation criteria, which up to now, this 2014 version, was, I suppose, affectionately known as the Blue Book. And these criteria are revised typically every 5 years. The previous ones of that were about 2008. So this review that we're speaking about today is a fairly comprehensive review. So the criteria set out what must be learned, what must be delivered in engineering programs. To back that up then is a procedure for education, which we're not considering today, but that looks at how academic institutes deliver those programs and the evidence they must present to Engineers Ireland and the review panels from Engineers Ireland to demonstrate that the learning outcomes are being achieved, and that all the processes and facilities in those organizations and quality systems are up to what's required. So the program outcomes, just 7 program outcomes, and they're based across a number of criteria. Again, this is what the review teams look for when they go on site. The first 4 look at, I suppose, what we call the hard engineering topics, so the understanding of science, mathematics, how to undertake experiments, research. So I suppose many, and particularly in industry, it's taken for granted that any engineering graduate coming out of college must know these. But you know, engineering education is much more than that. And we have to, I suppose, put the engineering education in context of the environment, and that the engineer understands that they have ethical responsibilities to society, the environment, and the profession, and our society in general. So these necessary skills then are also imparted as part of engineering education, as is working effectively as an individual, but also in a team and in multidisciplinary settings. And also the ability of engineers to communicate effectively on complex topics and be aware of the audience that they're speaking to, so that they can get these concepts across. And we see evidence of that, for example, if engineers are say building a wind farm, they now have to go down and, you know, communicate those ideas to local communities as to why this wind farm or infrastructure is needed, and the impact it will have on their environment, on their locale. So we're seeing, I suppose, the manifestation on the requirement for this type of education in the real world. As part of the review process, which was commenced about 18 months ago, it's a fairly comprehensive review. We surveyed a number of our accreditation volunteers and academics to get their feedback from the process and how it's been operating to date. We also surveyed employers and to see what the future skills needs from industry are. We also had back to back, as I mentioned earlier, we have to make sure then that we are compliant with the various international standards, and they in turn are also evolving in parallel. So it's moving parts, and we have to stay up to date with all these moving parts. We collaborated in research with a number of higher education institutes and a variety of stakeholders, including QQI. We then constituted a subgroup of the accreditation board, and as Morris has outlined earlier, and we built hugely on the experience to date from and deliberations of the accreditation board. So really the practical experience of what we've learned through our very many visits, and we typically would have 6 or 7 visits a year, comprising about looking at 50 to 60 engineering programs. So a lot of experience, a lot of, I suppose, knowledge has gone and feedback has gone into the process. So in summary, why do we need to change? What do we need to change and reflect? Well, from industry, one of the demands is looking at future areas coming down the road, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, Industry 4.0. And while these are fairly familiar terminology to engineers, I suppose imparting that knowledge to students and also so that they can in turn impart it to society is a key part. Also looking at engineering the broader perspective as a career, management skills and project management. So we're looking at, you know, making engineers more effective in the workplace, to be aware of the financial cost implications of the decisions they make if they add a component or if they undertake additional testing. So it's to make engineering graduates aware of the implications of their actions in the real world. Also incorporating the UN sustainable goals. And this, I think, is a key aspect. The International Engineering Alliance is currently involved in a project with the World Federation of Engineering Organizations to review their criteria and make them more relevant and incorporate the UN SDGs. There's increased focus on diversity and inclusion from every perspective in terms of communications and compliance with environmental issues. And don't forget that engineers are creative and need to, I suppose, include creativity in every aspect of what they're doing, and continuous improvement. And I suppose lastly, on growing importance of lifelong learning, we need to reflect that our delivery methods for education are changing. Least of all, we've all been online for the last pretty much year, but that's also been a great benefit. What we're seeing now is that because much of the program deliveries and module deliveries is online, we're now seeing that people from the workplace can just take part in a particular module. So there's opportunities there for lifelong learning and for the HEIs to, I suppose, sell and deliver individual modules specific to very niche industries that they couldn't really do heretofore, and also other methods of delivery, such as professional apprentices. So moving on, then I'll hand you over to Richard, who will, I suppose, take you through the changes as they appear in the document. Thank you, Richard.
Okay, thanks, Damien. So the first thing I should say is that the accreditation criteria document is available on our website. So that's engineersireland.ie, and you'll be able to peruse the document there, as well as then our full list of accredited courses. So I suppose the first observation really on the new criteria is that it represents incremental changes to the existing 2014 criteria. So that was really built on a recognition that the criteria as they stood were certainly quite relevant and received very strong feedback on that, but that there were changes that we could make on the back of the accreditation review. So you'll see there in the middle column that there are 20 criteria split between program outcomes, program areas, and program management. The emphasis very much remains on the program outcomes. That, as Damien outlined, that our accreditation is an outcomes-based process. So the program outcomes, I'll go through them one by one in a moment. The program areas then are areas of the curricular content that we think are necessary for students to be able to understand and go on to achieve the program outcomes. So those program areas would typically be built up by the constituent modules on a program. The program management criteria then, the PM 1 to 5, are essentially a reorganization of the existing program management criteria in the existing accreditation criteria document. So for example, those relate to entry standards, duration and structure and so on, that there is no major change to those from the existing criteria. It's primarily a reorganization and relabeling. That the two significant changes that I will call attention to are the new program outcome, PO8 on engineering management, and the new program area on sustainability. So I'll now take you through each of the program outcomes. So I'd like to point out that, as Damien mentioned, the accreditation criteria are structured around the education standard for our professional titles. So there are 4 different education standards, and in this presentation I will be focusing on the Chartered Engineer standard. As well, I'd like to call your attention to the phrase indicative graduate attributes include. So in the criteria, the emphasis is on the headline program outcome. So for example, for this program outcome on knowledge and understanding, that is advanced knowledge and understanding of the mathematics, sciences, data science, analytics, and other technologies underpinning their branch of engineering. The areas that then follow are indicative graduate attributes. In that, we mean that there may be other ways of achieving and demonstrating the achievement of the program outcome, and that I'm sure the various HEIs will be able to approach that in different ways. The areas that we're highlighting from Engineers Ireland perspective are what we think are really strong indicative graduate attributes of the headline program outcome. So you'll see on each slide as well, the text highlighted in green are the changes to the previous edition of accreditation criteria. So in this program outcome on knowledge and understanding, the main change, there's no major change other than the areas highlighted in green, which is the incorporation of data science and analytics. So you see that in the headline program outcome and in the first indicative graduate attribute. That of course reflects the point arising from the accreditation review that Damien mentioned, which is the importance of data science and analytics in underpinning new areas of technology and really the current and future state of the engineering profession. Our second program outcome is problem analysis. That is the ability to identify, formulate, and analyze complex engineering problems. So the indicative graduate attributes, you'll see them listed there. The major changes to the previous edition are that we're emphasizing the professional responsibilities towards people and the environment. That's a phrase that you'll see popping up in several of the program outcomes and really reflects the importance of situating engineering work in terms of those responsibilities towards both people and the environment. Another change that I'd call your attention to in this program outcome is the incorporation of modeling. monitoring, and again, emerging technologies and data science. Again, these are transforming the engineering profession, and it's quite important that graduates would have an exposure to and an understanding of those areas. The third program outcome is on design. So that is the ability to design innovative solutions to complex engineering problems. So in the previous edition of the criteria, of course, the program outcome C was design, and we've just made a change to how that's phrased in the title. And I think that phrase, innovative solutions to complex engineering problems, that seeks to capture the differentiation between the different standards in our accreditation criteria, so that a chartered engineer, a graduate that aspires towards becoming a chartered engineer once they've developed professional experience, should be able to design solutions that are innovative, and that those would be to complex engineering problems. In the indicative graduate attributes then, we've really picked out those components of that these problems are complex in that they're ill-defined, that innovative solutions may include novel systems, components, and processes. And again, that phrase of the importance that in design, it would be considered the professional responsibilities towards people and the environment. The fourth program outcome is investigation. So this is the ability to investigate, experiment, and apply standard and specialized research methods. So we've made a minor modification here to include that this does incorporate three different aspects in terms of that is investigation, experimentation, and research. And again, that would include, for example, a critical analysis of how literature and data is used, which I think is that critical approach is extremely important in today's world. The fifth program outcome is professional and ethical responsibilities. So some of you would be familiar with this as the old program outcome E on ethics. So this program outcome covers understanding of and commitment to professional and ethical responsibilities towards people and the environment in the practice of engineering. Certainly based on the wealth of experience of the Accreditation Board and our volunteers of carrying out visits, we do find that ethics is one that deserves particular attention. So we've sought through revising the indicative graduate attributes for this program outcome to try to bring some more clarity to what exactly we mean by ethics and the kind of attributes that graduates would seek to develop by undertaking an accredited engineering program. So the first of those relates to sustainability, which is an understanding and appreciation of the environmental, social, and economic impacts of their judgments, and to promote the principles and practices of sustainable development. And we'll pick this up in the program area on sustainability a little bit later. Secondly, it relates to the role of the engineer in society and those professional conduct in terms of acting with honesty, integrity, and objectivity. It also includes, as Damien referenced, something arising from our accreditation review, which is the importance of equality, diversity, and inclusion and their impact on professional engineering practice. Fourthly, then, it includes the commitment to the ethical usage of technology and data, which I think is an important component of, as we mentioned, the increased use of data science, analytics, and emerging technologies, that must come with an understanding and commitment to their ethical usage. And then fifthly, the importance of a knowledge and understanding of health, safety, culture, and risk issues, and a commitment to relevant legal requirements. The sixth program outcome is on teamwork and lifelong learning. So it's important to realize that this includes a few different components. So that is to the ability to work effectively independently, but also in diverse and inclusive teams, and to prepare for lifelong learning. So there are three components to that program outcome in terms of working independently in teams and preparing for lifelong learning. So in our indicative graduate attributes, those include the interactions between the various engineering disciplines, as well as then interactions with other professions with whom graduates will likely go on to work. It also includes the ability to work with a broad range of stakeholders and in multidisciplinary settings, as well as active participation in diverse and inclusive teams, and then a recognition for the need for and the ability to plan and carry through self-directed CPD. The seventh learning program outcome is on communication. So that is the ability to communicate effectively on complex engineering activities to diverse audiences. So in this edition of the accreditation criteria, we've added that phrase to diverse audiences. So that would include design and implementation of effective communication strategies. So for example, that of course may include public consultations. Also, we've referenced there the advantages and disadvantages of various concepts and communicating those activities to diverse audiences. As well, we refer to the use of both traditional and digital media. The final of the 8 programme outcomes is a new programme outcome, which is on engineering management. So firstly, I'd like to say that while this is a new programme outcome in its own right, it is built of the components of previous programme outcomes. So for example, there were elements of this included in the programme outcomes E, F, and G. That was on ethics, teamwork, communication. So what we sought to do is, based on the feedback from the accreditation review, that we thought that this deserves its own programme outcome. It's also to bring us in line with, as Damien mentioned, the graduate attributes under the International Engineering Alliance, for example, the Washington Accord. So we brought this programme outcome together, which covers knowledge and understanding of engineering management principles and financial decision making, which are relevant to the branch of engineering, and an ability to apply these to one's own work and to the management of projects. And I would call particular attention to that phrase, relevant to the branch of engineering, because we do acknowledge that its relevance will vary according to the branch of engineering, and that was a strong point made by our accreditation board review group. So the indicative graduate attributes for this programme outcome include the organisational structures, commercial governance and legal principles and contractual arrangements, management of resources, including HR, and project management and work planning and monitoring tools. So then just to round off this section, this I know is, there's a lot of text on this slide, but you will find it on a dedicated page in our accreditation criteria document. This is really to differentiate the 4 education standards within the accreditation criteria. So you see those for engineering technician up to chartered engineer, and then they're differentiated according to the underlined words. So for example, on programme outcome 1, the differentiation is based on the depth and breadth of the knowledge and understanding. And you see for some of the other programme outcomes, the differentiator is based on the level of professional practice. So I would encourage you to peruse that particular page when you're looking through the accreditation criteria to gain an understanding of how we differentiate our 4 education standards. So on to I'll just spend a short period on the programme areas and the programme management criteria. That the programme areas 1 to 6 remain unchanged, other than some very minor modifications, but we are introducing a new programme area on sustainability. So just as I mentioned at the outset, that these programme areas describe curricular content that we think are necessary for students to go on to achieve the programme outcomes. So on sustainability was a very strong emerging trend from our accreditation review, both at the surveys and looking at what our international partners are doing. So in the programme area, we describe that students need to be familiar with the impact of their work on the 3 pillars of sustainability, and that's also picked up in the programme outcomes. There are also certain specific sustainability concepts that we do think are cross-cutting and that students should have an awareness of, such as net zero carbon, resource efficiency, circular economy, and whole life cost. As well, that we think that students should be exposed to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Their relevance, of course, may vary across the branches of engineering. So for example, the Sustainable Development Goal related to energy may be more relevant for certain engineering programs rather than others. But we do think that students should be exposed to the goals and should have an understanding of them, even if the level of coverage given to specific ones may vary according to the branch of engineering. And then we outline that students should develop competencies for achieving the SDGs. So in the accreditation criteria document, you'll see how we've mapped the competences that have been outlined by other organizations for achieving the SDGs to our own programme outcomes. So for example, in terms of critical thinking and reflection, we map to the program outcome and problem analysis. So again, we think the achievement of the program outcomes will help students to develop competencies to go on to achieve the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, and of course the successor goals, which may follow from the UN in the following years. Our program management criteria, as I mentioned, relate to how a program is managed, such as QA, entry standards, duration, and so on. Many of these remain unchanged from the previous edition of the accreditation criteria. That there has been one change, for example, relates to entry standards, and we will highlight that in a dedicated accreditation webinar in the coming months. So finally, just a word on the implementation of the criteria. So as Maurice mentioned, that they've been adopted by the Accreditation Board, approved by the Executive Board, and they're now available on our website. But we completely recognise that it does take time to make amendments to programmes, to collect evidence, to organise accreditation visits, and we accept that the demonstration of the achievement of some of the changes outlined in our accreditation criteria may not be possible to implement until at least 2022. So for this year, 2021, there'll be a transition period where HEIs can apply for accreditation under either the existing, the 2014 criteria, or the incoming 2021 criteria. And as well, please remember that Engineers Ireland is on hand, that if you have any queries related to the criteria or evidence or other implementation, just please feel free to contact us. And throughout this year, we will be communicating the new criteria through webinars like this, other training sessions, and to again, please contact us with any queries. We are currently planning our schedule for the year ahead in terms of accreditation visits, and we're always looking for volunteers to act as accreditation assessors. So I would encourage you to please contact us at accreditation@engineersireland.ie to arrange a visit or to volunteer with us. So with that, I will hand you over to Maria Kine, who's the Head of Faculty of Applied Science, Engineering and Technology at Limerick Institute of Technology. Maria was a member of our review group, so thanks Maria for saying a few words from a Head of Faculty perspective.
Thank you, Richard and Damien, for inviting me to say a few words from the Head of Faculty perspective and as a member of the Engineers Ireland Accreditation Board. It should be acknowledged, I suppose, starting off, that faculty schools of engineering have had a long engagement with Engineers Ireland around all of the Engineers Ireland activities, of which accreditation is one of those activities. And we have also, within accreditation, we volunteer for our members of the accreditation boards, and we volunteer as on accreditation panels to other higher educational institutions, including universities, institutes of technology and technological universities. So there is good engagement between the faculties and schools of engineering and the Engineers Ireland, and that's very positive and has led us to a very useful and new set of criteria that reflect what is happening on engineering programs in the sector. The last set of accreditation criteria were published in 2014-15 because the procedure was published in 15. And a lot has happened in the engineering education space in that period of time, and our programs have developed over that period of time through programmatic review and other changes. And what we have here in the accreditation criteria reflects a lot of what we have already put into our programs, especially in the areas of sustainable development goals, diversity and inclusion, and engineering management. The accreditation board started to look at this around this time last year, and we had a few meetings first with the accreditation board, and they only meet about once a month, once every 2 months, depending on the amount of work we have to fulfill. And then we decided that this job was, we wanted to devote a lot of time to doing, preparing a good set of accreditation criteria. So we set up a working group from the accreditation board to look at this activity. So that was set up around the summer of last year. So we spent a lot of months meeting regularly, and we went over every word of the program outcomes. So every word in there was considered very carefully by all the accreditation board members. We spent a lot of time trying to get it right. One or two things I would just mention is when we were talking about the engineering management and setting up a new program outcome, we were very concerned because engineering management, if you look at the content there, I mean, you could write a whole new program on that just one program outcome. So the vision of, or what we envisage for that program outcome would be that the program, the engineering management would be approximately about 10%, or not 10%, 10 credits of the 240 credit level 8 program. So that was our visit. We were concerned that if we put in a very general program outcome like that, that there would be a danger of everybody feeling they had to change their programs substantially to allow for that program outcome. But the accreditation board, we kind of quantified it in some way. We envisaged that would be approximately 10 credits throughout your engineering program worth of knowledge imparted to students, or learning outcomes imparted to students on that subject area. So I just felt that that needed to be mentioned. Also, in terms of the sustainable development goals, we recognize that they would be more relevant to some programs than other engineering programs, and that will also be noted by the engineering visiting panels. Diversity and inclusion is a huge area within the entire education space, and that again we felt that was important to be included because that's the way our engineering programs and all programs in HEIs are going forward. For the transition period, it will be important to have clarity on how long the transition period continues. And Richard stated there for approximately a year. And when do the new accreditation criteria kick in? That will be important to have clarity on that going forward. And it's all about communicating the new criteria to staff. And it would be useful, the last time we changed the accreditation criteria, it would be useful if the HEI in question, Engineers Ireland came to visit them about 6 months before the expected site visit to alert staff to the changes, because even if we have webinars, we probably need targeted webinars when we're coming up to accreditation about 6 months beforehand. I think that would be very helpful as a suggestion. So I leave it at that. I know time is pressing and we want to leave some time for people to ask questions. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Maria. So I'd just again like to remind people to post any questions you have in the chat function. Maybe while you're doing that, I'll just remind you that the criteria are available on our website, and is that you can also search for an accredited program again through that same webpage. And just to promote one upcoming event, which is by Engineers Ireland's Academic Society, which is the SDGs on our campus, and that's taking place at 10 a.m. on Thursday, the 18th of February. Again, you'll find the details on that on the Engineers Ireland website.